What if you've been lied to your entire life? What if one of the planet's most famous mysteries, long relegated to the dustbin of myths and exaggerations, is actually real? They tell you the Bermuda Triangle doesn't exist, that it's merely a fabrication of journalists, a myth born in the mid-20th century to sell cheap books and newspapers. They present you with seemingly convincing arguments: heavy shipping traffic, complex meteorology, human error. They tell you the number of incidents in this area does not exceed the statistical average for any other part of the world ocean. This is a comfortable, reassuring, and completely false picture of the world. Today, we begin an investigation that will shatter this illusion. We will not rely on rumors, eyewitness testimonies, or yellowed tabloid clippings. Our only tool will be cold, impartial logic. Our weapon will be a massive data set processed by the most advanced analytical system ever created, Logos 7. We have uploaded everything into it. Every official report on maritime and aviation incidents for the last century and a half. All available meteorological summaries, maps of ocean currents, geological survey data of the seabed, and the complete logs of shipping and aviation routes from around the world. Billions of units of information. And we ask the system one single question: is the Bermuda Triangle a statistical anomaly? The answer we received didn't just confirm the phenomenon's existence. It proved that the official story is not a mistake. It is a deliberate cover-up. It is protocol, coincidence, designed to ensure you never ask the right questions. Let's start with the foundation upon which all skepticism is built. The United States Coast Guard, one of the most authoritative organizations on this matter, officially states, "In a review of many losses within the area of the Bermuda Triangle, nothing has been discovered that would indicate that casualties were the result of anything other than physical causes." The insurance giant Lloyd's of London confirms that the triangle is not a particularly dangerous zone. It sounds compelling. Any rational person would accept these statements at face value, but that is the genius of disinformation. It appeals to common sense while ignoring the facts that lie deeper. We began our analysis by adopting the skeptic's position. We ordered Logos 7 to build a predictive model of disasters worldwide. The system accounted for everything: traffic density, thousands of ships and planes crossing the region daily. It considered the Gulf Stream, a powerful current capable of quickly carrying away debris. It factored in unpredictable weather, sudden storms and hurricanes born in the warm Atlantic waters. It included complex seabed topography and magnetic anomalies. Based on this data, the system created a map of expected incidents. It had hotspots: the Strait of Malacca, the South China Sea, the coast of Somalia, and yes, the Bermuda Triangle area was also marked as a high-risk zone. But then we took the next step. We overlaid this predictive map with real data, all documented cases of disappearances and disasters from the last 150 years. And this is where the neat picture of the official version began to shatter into pieces. In most hotspots around the world, the real data matched the system's forecast with a margin of error of 4 to 6%. But not in the Bermuda Triangle. Here, Logos 7 recorded a statistical deviation that is impossible to ignore. The number of unexplained disappearances, those not linked to confirmed weather cataclysms or technical malfunctions, exceeded the predicted level by 300%. Let me repeat that. 3 times more than there should be, according to all laws of statistics and probability. We checked the calculations 12 times. We added new variables, tightened the data selection criteria. The result remained unchanged. Logos 7 delivered its conclusion. The probability that such a concentration of anomalous events in one geographical location is a random coincidence is 0.001%. This is not a coincidence. It is a pattern. But raw numbers, however staggering, are only the first level of our analysis. The true anomaly of the Bermuda Triangle lies not in how many ships and planes vanish there, but in how they vanish. And to prove this, we had Logos 7 create an entirely new analytical filter. We called it the Sudden Cessation Index. Imagine a typical disaster at sea. A vessel gets caught in a storm. The captain fights desperately for the life of the ship and crew. He sends an SOS signal. Radio operators report coordinates, describe the damage, speak of giant waves. Even if the ship sinks, it leaves traces. Lifeboats, life jackets, oil slicks on the water, floating debris. There is a narrative, a story, of a struggle that ends tragically. Now compare this to a classic case from the Bermuda Triangle. A ship or plane is on course in perfectly clear weather. The crew makes contact, reporting that all is well. The voice is calm, with no sign of alarm. A few minutes later, the object simply vanishes. It doesn't answer calls. It disappears from radar. It sends no distress signal, no signs of a struggle, no debris, no oil slicks, nothing. As if a giant, invisible eraser had wiped it from the face of the earth. It is precisely this difference that the Sudden Cessation Index measures. It analyzes dozens of parameters: the presence or absence of a distress signal, the latest weather reports, the condition of the vessel, the experience of the crew, and most importantly, the complete absence of any physical traces after the incident. The higher the index, the stranger and more anomalous the disappearance. We ran the entire global incident database through this filter. The results were shocking. The system generated a heat map of the planet. The vast majority of the oceans were colored in cool blues and greens, corresponding to incidents with a low index. Tragic, but explainable. But one area blazed bright red, like an unhealing wound on the body of the planet. This area coincided with terrifying precision with the vertices of the Bermuda Triangle, Bermuda, the southern tip of Florida, and Puerto Rico. According to the correlation analysis by Logos 7, over 75% of all incidents recorded worldwide with the maximum Sudden Cessation Index occurred right here. Armed with this new perspective, let's look at the skeptics' arguments again. They say there were severe storms, but Logos 7 proves that in 63% of the high-index disappearances, the weather was from clear to moderate. Experienced captains and pilots simply could not have been caught off guard. They say it was human error. But the system analyzed the service records of hundreds of missing crew commanders. The vast majority were veterans, people with thousands of flight hours or decades of sea experience. The probability that such a number of top-tier professionals would simultaneously make fatal, inexplicable errors leading to complete disappearance without a trace is negligible. The system estimates it as 1 in 80 million. The most sophisticated scientific theory put forward to explain the phenomenon is the sudden release of methane hydrates from the ocean floor. The theory suggests that a huge gas bubble rising to the surface drastically reduces the water's density, causing a ship to sink instantly. For planes, methane in the air could cause an engine explosion. It sounds plausible. But we tested this version too. We loaded all available maps of known hydrate deposits and seismic activity data from the seabed for the entire observation period into Logos 7. The system then matched each point of disappearance with this data. The correlation was astonishingly weak. Less than 15% of the anomalous disappearances occurred in zones with confirmed geological activity of this kind. Moreover, a simulation by Logos 7 showed that even the most powerful methane release capable of sinking a cargo ship would create a huge field of small bubbles and turbulent currents visible on the surface for several hours. And most importantly, this theory in no way explains the disappearance of an entire flight of 5 Avenger torpedo bombers in 1945, spread out over dozens of miles. A methane bubble cannot chase a squadron. So, what are we left with? We have a geographical zone where the number of unexplained disasters is 3 times higher than any conceivable statistical norm. We have a unique character to these disasters, repeated nowhere else in the world: sudden, complete, and traceless disappearance, often under ideal conditions. We have irrefutable data proving that neither weather, nor human error, nor known geological phenomena can explain even a small fraction of these events. Logo 7 has delivered its verdict. Protocol, coincidence, is a lie. The myth that the Bermuda Triangle is a myth is the largest and most successful truth suppression operation in modern history. We stand on the threshold of a mystery, and the first step to solving it is to admit that it exists. We have proven that some force or phenomenon is at work in this region of the Atlantic, operating by its own, as yet incomprehensible laws. It is invisible, but its consequences are absolutely real. It leaves behind not wreckage, but only a gaping void and silence. But this silence has its own language. In every report of instrument failure, in every interrupted radio transmission, in every strange compass behavior before a disappearance, a key is hidden. Logos 7 has analyzed hundreds of these fragmentary pieces of evidence and found a clear, repeating pattern, an electromagnetic signature, an anomaly in the very ether that precedes every disappearance. This is the signature of an unknown killer. And in the next chapter, we will begin to decipher it. We will delve into the world of distorted radio waves and maddened instruments to understand what the doomed crews hear and see in their final moments. We will dissect the ether anomaly. Chapter 2, the ether anomaly. In the last chapter, we established an irrefutable fact. The Bermuda Triangle is not a fiction. It is a statistical wound on the body of the planet, a place where the laws of probability cease to function. We have shattered protocol, coincidence. But by proving the phenomenon exists, we have only arrived at the main question: how does it operate? What is the mechanism that erases ships and planes from the face of the earth, leaving not a single trace? The answer is not hidden in the ocean depths or the fury of hurricanes. It hangs in the very air. It is an anomaly in the ether. Imagine yourself in the shoes of a ship's captain or an aircraft commander in the mid-20th century. Your life and the lives of your crew depend on a few unshakable constants. You know that the compass needle, obeying the Earth's magnetic field, will always point north. You know that radio waves, carrying your voice and vital information, propagate predictably. You know that your instruments, altimeters, gyroscopes, radars, are your eyes and ears, your only guide in the vast expanse of ocean and sky. This faith in the laws of physics is the foundation of your world. Now imagine that in a single moment, this foundation turns to dust. Your compass needle begins to spin wildly. Your radio receiver, instead of the dispatcher's voice, spews only white noise or, worse, the silence of dead space. Your instruments show you are flying upside down at an altitude of 10,000 meters, even though you can see the calm surface of the ocean just 100 feet below your window. This is not just a technical failure. It is the collapse of your entire reality. And this is exactly what the victims of the Bermuda Triangle face in their final moments. For decades, these reports were dismissed as panic, inexperience, or exaggeration. They were called anecdotes, tales that were impossible to verify. We decided to put an end to these conjectures. We loaded every available fragment of information related to navigational and communication failures in this region into Logo 7. This included hundreds of official reports, thousands of pages of radio transcriptions, testimonies of surviving witnesses, logbooks, and even classified data from military patrols. We instructed the system to search not just for failures, but for patterns, to find the signature, the handwriting of an unknown force. And the system found it. The first step was to filter out the informational noise. Logo 7 immediately cross-referenced every incident with a global map of geomagnetic activity and solar flares. Skeptics love to cite magnetic storms, which can cause communication and navigation failures. It's a reasonable assumption. And it turned out to be wrong. According to the systems analysis, less than 11% of the recorded anomalies in the Bermuda Triangle coincided in time with any significant solar or geomagnetic activity. This means that in 89% of cases, the source of the interference was local. It did not come from space. It was born somewhere there, between the sky and the water. Having cleaned the data, the system began to classify. It divided all anomalies into three main groups, the three horsemen of the apocalypse for any navigator. The first group, magnetic chaos. This is not just a compass failure. The analysis revealed at least 4 distinct types of malfunctions. First, the wild spin, where the needle literally goes insane. Second, the dead lock, where the compass freezes on a single heading, regardless of the actual course. Third, the most insidious, creeping deviation, where the needle slowly, imperceptibly to the crew, begins to drift away from true north, leading the vessel or aircraft on a giant arc into the open ocean, towards its doom. Fourth, the rarest, inversion, where north and south switch places. A simulation by Logos 7 shows that an experienced pilot could handle the first 2 types by switching to visual landmarks or celestial navigation. But creeping deviation in poor visibility or at night is almost a guaranteed death sentence. The second group of anomalies, dead ether. This includes everything related to communication and electronic instruments. And again, it's not just static. The system identified a sinister sequence. First, the appearance of a strange, low-frequency hum in the headphones. Then, a sharp fading of the signal, as if someone is smoothly turning down the volume knob. And finally, complete, absolute, ringing silence. In some cases, as transcriptions of final communications testify, pilots reported fragments of phrases in unknown languages or strange, non-melodic music breaking through the noise. But the most terrifying thing is radar failure. Logos 7 found more than 40 documented cases where coastal radars and other vessels simply stopped seeing an object, even though it should have physically still been within their range. It didn't just disappear, it became invisible to electronics. The third group is the strangest and most frightening. We called it sensory distortions. This category includes the testimonies of the few who passed through an anomaly and survived. They describe a phenomenon that journalists have dubbed electronic fog. But this is not fog in the usual sense. It's more like a living, swirling haze of yellow or grayish-green color, which seems to have its own electrical charge. Witnesses speak of the smell of ozone, of static electricity crackling in the air, of the hair on their arms literally standing on end. Inside this cloud, time and space seem to lose all meaning. Instruments begin to show absurd readings. Some pilots reported flying a distance in a few minutes that should have taken them half an hour, as if they had entered some kind of time tunnel. The most famous case is that of pilot Bruce Gernon, who claimed his plane, after entering such a cloud, covered a distance in 28 minutes that would normally take at least 75, and in doing so, inexplicably ended up 100 miles further from his destination than he should have been. We loaded his flight plan, aircraft data, and weather report into Logos 7. The system's conclusion was unequivocal. Under the stated weather conditions, and with the aircraft's technical specifications, such a leap in time and space is impossible from the perspective of known aerodynamics and physics. Either Gernon is lying, or he encountered a phenomenon that is beyond our comprehension. But classification was only the beginning. The real breakthrough came when Logos 7 began to build correlation models. The system overlaid the coordinates of all these incidents onto the map of the Bermuda Triangle, and a shocking picture emerged. The anomalies were not distributed evenly. They were concentrated in several clearly defined zones, a kind of electromagnetic vortex. One such vortex was located east of the Bahamas in an area known as the tongue of the ocean. Another, even more powerful, was located over the deepest part of the Atlantic, the Puerto Rico Trench. And most importantly, the system discovered a direct, irrefutable link. Over 92% of all traceless disappearances in the triangle occurred either directly within these zones or after the vessel's or aircraft's route had crossed their boundary. These zones are not constant. They pulsate, changing in size and intensity. Sometimes they lie dormant for months and then flare up with new force, devouring everything that comes near. We went even further. We had the system build a three-dimensional dynamic model of one such event. We used the tragedy of Flight 19, the disappearance of 5 U.S. Navy torpedo bombers on December 5, 1945, as a basis. The official version states that the flight leader, Lieutenant Taylor, made an error, lost his bearings, and led his group into the open ocean, where they ran out of fuel, a version that lays the blame on dead heroes. Logos 7 utterly demolished it. The system reconstructed the flight. The weather conditions were ideal. All the pilots were experienced veterans. Lieutenant Taylor had over 2,500 flight hours. We analyzed his last words. "Both my compasses are out. I don't know where we are. Everything looks strange, even the ocean." These are not the words of a man who is simply lost. These are the words of a man whose world has collapsed. The simulation conducted by Logo 7 showed the following scenario. The flight enters one of the active electromagnetic zones. Instantly, magnetic and gyro compasses fail. Radio communication becomes distorted. Taylor hears the ground with interference, and the ground hears him only in fragments. But the most terrifying thing happens next. The system modeled the effect of a powerful, focused electromagnetic field on the human brain, specifically on the areas responsible for spatial orientation. The result, even if the pilots could see the sun, they could have experienced an acute sense of disorientation, an inability to correctly interpret visual signals. They were blinded and deafened by an invisible force. They were not just lost. They were being led to the slaughter. The system calculated their probable flight paths based on the chaotic readings of faulty instruments and their last messages. The most likely trajectory led them not just into the open ocean, but directly into the epicenter of a second, even more powerful anomalous zone. They flew from one trap straight into another. The probability of such a coincidence is 1 in 300,000. This was not a coincidence. It was a systematic annihilation. So, now we know more. The phenomenon of the Bermuda Triangle has a clear, measurable signature. It consists of localized but incredibly powerful bursts of electromagnetic energy of unknown origin. They destroy technology, distort perception, and guide their victims to their doom. We have mapped these deadly traps. But this raises even more disturbing questions. What is the source of these fields? Why do they activate? And what happens to those who fall into their epicenter? The ether remains silent. Electronics die. But sometimes, in rare cases, this force leaves behind witnesses. Silent, eerie witnesses. It takes the crew, but leaves the ship untouched. To move forward, we must step onto the decks of these floating tombs. In the next chapter, we will dissect the ghost ship's marker. Chapter 3, the ghost ship's marker. We've established that an invisible force operates in the Bermuda Triangle, leaving behind an electromagnetic scar. It silences radios, drives compasses mad, and distorts the very perception of reality. But what happens when a crew finds itself at the epicenter of this vortex? What happens when technology fails and the mind follows? To answer this question, we must examine the most chilling and tangible evidence this anomaly has ever left behind. We must board the ghost ships. What could be more terrifying than disappearing without a trace? Perhaps only one thing: disappearing, while leaving behind an empty, undamaged shell. A ship drifting in the ocean under full sail. In the galley, a hot meal. In the cabins, personal belongings. The ship's log open to the last entry, cut off mid-sentence. Everything is in place, except for the people. Every such ship is not just a maritime mystery. It is a crime scene where the victims have vanished and the murder weapon left no fingerprints. It is a marker pointing to the nature of the force we are dealing with. For decades, these stories have been fodder for novelists. Official explanations have always boiled down to three versions: mutiny, piracy, or a sudden storm. Convenient, simple, and, as Logo 7 will now prove, completely baseless. We loaded the archives of every known ghost ship case in the Triangle over the last 200 years into the system. The system analyzed everything: the construction of the vessels, weather maps, crew member biographies, cargo contents, and last ports of call. And it identified a common, blood-chilling pattern that completely refutes the official versions. Let's consider the classic case. On January 31st, 1921, off Cape Hatteras, on the edge of the Bermuda Triangle, the 5-masted schooner Carol A. Deering was found. It was aground, its sails were set, but there was not a single soul on board. The rescue team that boarded her was confronted with a scene of absolute irrationality. On the stove in the galley were pots with food that had been cooked but not touched. In the captain's cabin, charts were laid out. The crew's personal belongings, money, and valuables were all in their places, but the lifeboats were missing. The ship's log, chronometer, and navigational equipment had vanished. The last entry in the watch log was dated January 23rd. It was completely routine. After it, 8 days of emptiness. The official investigation conducted by the US government reached a dead end. The piracy theory was immediately dismissed. Nothing of value was taken. The mutiny theory also failed to hold water. We tasked Logo 7 with conducting a deep psycholinguistic analysis of all available documents related to the crew, including their letters home. The system found not the slightest sign of conflict or discontent. The crew was professional and cohesive. That left the last, most popular version, a hurricane. Supposedly, the crew, fearing a storm, abandoned the ship in a panic. But here too, the data says otherwise. Logo 7 overlaid the exact route of the Deering onto detailed meteorological maps of the period. Yes, the schooner did pass through a zone of a strong storm. But the key point is, it passed through it and came out the other side. The last vessel to see the Deering, the steamer Hewitt, reported that the schooner appeared damaged, but was afloat and on course. This was on January 29th, several days after the storm, meaning the crew had survived the hurricane. They had overcome the most terrible threat the ocean could throw at them. So why did they abandon their ship later, in relatively calm waters? Why take navigational instruments with them into a small lifeboat, where they are far less useful than aboard a huge schooner? The answer provided by Logo 7 is terrifying in its logic. The crew did not abandon the ship because they feared drowning. They abandoned it because something more terrifying than any storm was happening on board. Recall Chapter 2. Magnetic chaos and sensory distortions. The simulation run by the system paints the following picture. After the storm, the Deering enters one of the active electromagnetic zones. Compasses begin to spin. The radio is silent. Perhaps the crew begins to see and hear things that are not there. Their world, their reality, collapses. They no longer trust their eyes, the readings of their instruments, or the ship itself that had carried them across the ocean. The disappearance of the navigational equipment is the key. It was not theft. It was a desperate attempt to take with them something they thought still worked, something that could show them the way in a world gone mad. They abandoned a perfectly sound ship, fleeing not from the ocean, but from the insanity that had engulfed their vessel. Their lifeboats were never found. If the Carol A. Deering is an example of how the anomaly drives people mad, then the disappearance of the naval transport ship USS Cyclops is an example of how it erases them from existence. This is not just a ghost ship. It is a phantom ship. In March 1918, this floating giant, one of the largest ships in the U.S. Navy, with 306 souls on board, departed from Barbados, bound for Baltimore. It never arrived. The Cyclops simply dissolved. No distress signal, no wreckage, no oil slicks, nothing. The weather on its route was perfect. The official theories were even more strained than in the case of the Deering. The first, capture by a German submarine. World War I was in full swing. We loaded all the declassified archives of the German Imperial Navy into Logo 7. The system conducted a total analysis of the logs of all submarines operating in the Atlantic during that period. The result was unequivocal. No German submarine was in the area of the Cyclops' disappearance. Moreover, after the war, the U.S. government officially inquired with Germany. The Germans confirmed they had nothing to do with it. The second theory, a sudden storm or a giant rogue wave. But as we've established, weather reports indicate calm seas. Besides, the Cyclops was a steel monster over 165 meters long. A Logo 7 simulation shows that to sink such a ship instantly, without a single distress call, would require an event of catastrophic, almost unimaginable power. Even if the hull broke apart, the radio operators would have had several minutes to send an SOS. But the ether was silent. The third theory, problems with the cargo. The Cyclops was carrying 10,000 tons of manganese ore. It was suggested that the cargo could have shifted, causing it to capsize. But here too, the system's analysis leaves no stone unturned. The system modeled hundreds of scenarios of cargo shift under various weather conditions. Even in the worst-case scenario, the process of capsizing would have taken at least 15 to 20 minutes. That is more than enough time to send multiple distress signals. Logo 7 arrives at the only possible conclusion. Whatever destroyed the Cyclops acted almost instantaneously and was absolutely total. It didn't just sink the ship. It gave not a single chance to any of the 306 people on board. The system correlated the presumed route of the Cyclops with our map of electromagnetic anomalies. The ship was heading straight into the heart of one of the most active and dangerous zones, the one located over the Puerto Rico Trench. Now, put these two cases together, the Carol A. Deering and the Cyclops. At first glance, they are completely different. In one case, an empty ship. In the other, a complete disappearance. But Logo 7 argues that these are two stages of the same process. It's like a first-degree burn versus a fourth-degree burn. In the case of the Deering, the anomaly was weak enough only to drive the crew insane and cause them to commit a suicidal act. But in the case of the Cyclops, the intensity of the field was several orders of magnitude higher. It wasn't just interference, it was a weapon. It didn't just disable the instruments. It destroyed the ship itself and everyone on board, possibly at a subatomic level. Perhaps that is why we never find wreckage, because there is no wreckage left. This pattern repeats itself again and again. The brigantine Mary Celeste, found in 1872. The Cuban schooner Rubicon, found in 1944 with only a single living dog on board. The list goes on. And in each case, the correlation matrix built by Logo 7 points to three common factors. First, the absence of any logical reason for disaster or flight. Second, evidence of a sudden interruption of normal activity. Third, the mandatory crossing of one of the active anomalous zones a few hours or days before the incident. Ghost ships are silent screams from the abyss. They prove that the force operating in the triangle possesses a kind of intelligence. It is capable not only of crude destruction, but also of sophisticated psychological warfare, breaking the will of the most resilient sailors. It cuts them off from the rest of the world, plunges them into chaos, and then either forces them to destroy themselves or grinds them to dust. We have analyzed the anomalies in the water, but this region is not only traversed by ships. Every day, hundreds of planes fly over it. They move at a different speed, at a different altitude, obeying the laws of aerodynamics. It seems they should be safer. But are they? Does the power of this anomaly extend to the heavens? To answer that question, we must rise from the seabed to an altitude of 10,000 meters. We must reconstruct the final flights of the doomed. In the next chapter, we will aim our analytical beam at the skies vector. Chapter 4. The skies vector. If the ocean in our investigation has been a two-dimensional board on which a tragedy unfolds, then the skies seem to be the absolute embodiment of freedom. 3 axes of movement, speed, altitude. An airplane is a triumph of human genius over gravity, a symbol of our dominion over the elements. It seems to us that up there, at an altitude of 10,000 meters, we are invulnerable, that the eerie anomalies lurking in the dark waters cannot reach us. This is another dangerous delusion. The force operating in the Bermuda Triangle is not confined to the plane of the ocean. It is 3-dimensional, and when it strikes from the sky, its action becomes even more swift, total, and irreversible. We recalibrated the analytical filters of Logos 7. We ascended from the seabed and focused on the sky. The vector of our investigation is the heavens. We loaded the system with data on every aviation disaster in this region, but our interest was not in ordinary tragedies, but in those that bore the familiar mark of the anomaly: a sudden cessation of communication, ideal weather conditions, and a complete, absolute absence of wreckage. And of course, our investigation began with the most famous, most mythologized, and most maligned incident in aviation history. December 5th, 1945. The disappearance of Flight 19. The official story, which you have been told for decades, is simple and convenient. 5 Avenger-type torpedo bombers of the U.S. Navy took off from Fort Lauderdale Air Station for a routine training exercise. The flight leader, Lieutenant Charles Taylor, supposedly became disoriented, incorrectly determined his position, his compasses failed, and, showing fatal stubbornness, he led all 5 planes into the open ocean where they ran out of fuel and crashed into the water. A tragic error by one man that cost the lives of 14 airmen. This version is convenient for everyone. It provides a simple explanation, finds a culprit, and closes the case. The problem is that, according to the analysis of Logos 7, this version is a 100% lie. We began by subjecting this theory to the simplest logical stress test. Let's assume Lieutenant Taylor really did get lost. Let's assume both of his compasses, magnetic and gyroscopic, failed. But there were 4 other planes in his flight. Each of them had its own, fully functional navigation instruments. The flight included experienced pilots, combat veterans. The official version asks us to believe that 4 professionals, seeing on their own instruments that their commander was leading them to their deaths, blindly followed him without making a single attempt to challenge his decision or set their own course. We tasked Logos 7 with modeling this scenario from the perspective of psychology and the standard operating procedures of the Navy at that time. The system processed thousands of similar situations from military aviation archives. The conclusion was categorical. The probability that 4 pilots would simultaneously violate all instructions and their self-preservation instinct to follow a clearly disoriented commander is less than 1/100%. It could not have happened. Something else was going on. The truth is revealed in the radio transmission transcripts. We conducted a full spectral and psycholinguistic analysis of them. Taylor's voice was not that of a panicked or stubborn man. It contained confusion and bewilderment. Recall his words, which we have already mentioned. Everything looks strange, even the ocean. Logos 7. Analyze this phrase in the context of thousands of pilot reports. It does not correspond to the standard description of losing one's bearings. It is a description of a visual distortion of reality. This is confirmed by the words of another pilot from the flight, who said over the radio, "If we knew where to fly, we would have been home long ago." They didn't just not know where they were. They did not recognize what they were seeing with their own eyes. But the most powerful blow to the official version comes from mathematics. We loaded all the data on the Avenger aircraft into the system: fuel capacity, cruising speed, fuel consumption. We compared this with the time of departure and the last radio transmission. The calculations of Logo 7 are irrefutable. At the time of the last contact with the ground, Flight 19 had enough fuel for at least another 2 to 3 hours of flight. They disappeared long before their tanks could have run dry. The version that they simply crashed into the water after running out of fuel is untenable. And here, another chilling act enters the story. A Martin Mariner rescue seaplane was dispatched to search for Flight 19, a huge flying boat with a crew of 13. 20 minutes after takeoff, it too disappeared. It simply vanished from radar in the very same area where Taylor was last heard. The official explanation: an in-air explosion due to a fuel vapor leak. The Martin Mariners did indeed have such a bad reputation. They were nicknamed flying gas tanks. But Logo 7 calculated the statistical probability. What are the chances that a rescue plane would explode due to a random technical malfunction at the exact same tiny point in space and time where, a few hours earlier, 5 other planes it was searching for had disappeared? The system gave the answer: 1 chance in 740 million. This is not a coincidence. It is a pattern. The Martin Mariner was not a random victim. It arrived at the crime scene and was eliminated by the same culprit. Flight 19 is not an isolated case. It is merely the most striking example of the anomaly's aviation vector. Let's consider other cases. January 29th, 1948. The British airliner Star Tiger, en route to Bermuda, transmits a routine position report. The weather is perfect. 31 people are on board. A few moments later, it vanishes. No SOS, no wreckage. Exactly 1 year later, on January 17th, 1949, its sister ship, the Star Ariel, disappears under precisely the same circumstances. The same crystal clear weather. The same routine message. The same sudden silence and complete absence of traces. Logo 7 conducted a comparative analysis of these two cases. It found over 30 matching parameters: aircraft type, crew experience, time of day, weather conditions, and most importantly, the flight path. Both aircraft, at the moment of disappearance, were crossing the same anomalous electromagnetic zone we identified in Chapter 2. This is no longer just a pattern. It looks like the work of a predator that is hidden on its hunting trail and is waiting for prey. But perhaps the most convincing example is the disappearance of 2 KC-135 Stratotanker military refueling planes on August 28, 1963. These were not fragile piston-engine aircraft from the 40s. These were huge 4-engine jet machines, the backbone of the U.S. Strategic Air Command. 2 such giants took off from Homestead Air Force Base in Florida and headed east, and both disappeared. The official version: a mid-air collision. It sounds logical, but Logo 7 asks one simple question: where is the wreckage? We instructed the system to model a mid-air collision of 2 KC-135 aircraft, each filled with tens of tons of jet fuel. The result of the simulation is a fireball several hundred meters in diameter, visible for dozens of miles. It's a debris field covering an area of at least 25 square kilometers. It's thousands of metal fragments floating on the ocean surface. Finding such a crash site is not a problem. But what was found in reality? A few small scraps and 1 piece of survival gear. That's all. This is physically impossible. Two giant aircraft cannot collide and leave behind practically nothing. They did not collide. They were erased. By generalizing all this data, Logos 7 derived a common signature for aviation disappearances in the Bermuda Triangle. It is similar to the maritime one, but has its own horrifying features. First, speed. The process takes not hours or minutes, but seconds. Second, totality. While a ship might remain afloat as a ghost, an airplane is destroyed completely, almost at a molecular level. Third, altitude. The anomaly operates at heights of up to 30 or 40,000 feet, creating invisible three-dimensional minefields in the sky. Now we see the big picture. Some force, generating powerful local electromagnetic fields, is nested in this region of the planet. It affects both the sea and the sky. It is capable of both driving one mad and instantly destroying. We have analyzed its manifestations. We have mapped its zones of activity, but we have still not answered the main question. Why? Why here? What is so special about this point on the globe? All threads lead in one direction, down, under the water, into the deepest and most mysterious part of the Atlantic Ocean. Perhaps the source of the celestial terror is not hidden in the clouds, but in the bottomless darkness of the deep. In the next chapter, we will plunge into this darkness. We will explore the epicenter, the abyss. Chapter 5, The Abyss Epicenter. We have followed the ghosts in the skies and on the sea. We have recorded their deadly signature, electromagnetic chaos that erases the boundaries of reality. We have proven that the anomalies are real, lethal, and possess a blood-chilling regularity. But until now, we have been circling, describing only the symptoms of the disease. We have answered the questions of what and how, but have skirted the most fundamental question: why? Why here? Why has this seemingly unremarkable stretch of the Atlantic become the stage for so many unexplained tragedies? The answer to this question cannot be found on the surface. It cannot be heard in the crackle of radio interference. To find the source, we must dive. A dive into darkness, into a zone of colossal pressure and eternal cold. We are heading into the geological heart of darkness, to the epicenter, the abyss. This region is unique not only for its grim reputation. Its uniqueness is written into the very structure of the planet. It is here, at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, that the deepest geological wound lies, the Puerto Rico Trench. This is not just a depression. It is a place where the North American tectonic plate, with unimaginable force, subducts under the Caribbean plate. The depth here reaches over 8,300 meters. The pressure exceeds 800 atmospheres. Not a single ray of light ever penetrates here. This is a world of titanic forces, a world of slow but unceasing violence, where continents grind against each other, accumulating stress over millennia. Skeptics see this as merely an interesting geological feature. We see it as the epicenter. We see the engine that powers the anomaly. Of course, there is one popular scientific theory that tries to link the geology of the seabed with the disappearances. You've surely heard of it. The methane hydrate, or burning ice, theory. It posits that deposits of frozen methane exist on the ocean floor under immense pressure. With a change in temperature or pressure, this ice can instantly turn into gas, releasing a gigantic gas bubble. This bubble, rising to the surface, drastically reduces the water's density, and any ship above it plummets into the abyss, as if into a void. It sounds elegant and plausible. That is precisely why this theory has become the perfect cover, a convenient screen to stop further investigation. We decided to tear this screen down. We loaded all available maps of methane hydrate deposits in the region into Logos 7. We added seismic data from the last 100 years, tracking any activity that could have triggered a release. Then the system overlaid the precise coordinates of all tracelessly vanished ships and planes with a high, sudden cessation index onto this map. If the theory were correct, we would see a clear correlation. The hotspots of disappearances should coincide with the zones of hydrate deposits, but the data showed a completely different picture. The correlation was negligible. Less than 18% of the anomalous disappearances occurred in the immediate vicinity of known or suspected methane hydrate fields. The other 82% happened tens or even hundreds of miles away from them. The theory did not explain the geography of the disasters, but more importantly, it did not explain their nature. A simulation by Logos 7 clearly demonstrated what happens during a massive methane release. It is not a silent disappearance. It is a bubbling, churning cauldron of water that persists on the surface for hours. It is the release of a huge amount of hydrogen sulfide, leaving a distinct chemical trace. It is a vast field of small debris that inevitably remains after a vessel is torn apart by turbulence. None of this was observed in the classic cases of disappearances. And finally, the most damning argument. The methane hydrate theory is completely powerless to explain aviation disasters. It cannot explain how a gas bubble from the ocean floor caused the 5 Avenger torpedo bombers of Flight 19, flying at an altitude of several thousand feet and spread out in space, to simultaneously lose their bearings and communication. It in no way explains the electromagnetic storms we recorded in Chapter 2. The conclusion of Logos 7 was unequivocal. The methane hydrate theory is a dead end, a false trail designed to lead us away from an uncomfortable truth. And the truth is that the energy source is far more powerful and fundamental. We return to the starting point, the Puerto Rico Trench, to the tectonic stress. And here, we applied a concept to our analysis that is rarely discussed outside the highly specialized circles of seismology and solid-state physics: the piezoelectric and piezomagnetic effects. In simple terms, many types of rock, especially those containing quartz, begin to generate a powerful electrical charge when subjected to colossal pressure. A tectonic plate, slowly bending and compressing over hundreds of kilometers, turns into a gigantic natural capacitor, accumulating an unimaginable amount of energy. Sometimes this energy is released as heat or mechanical motion, an earthquake. But Logos 7 proposed a hypothesis. What if, under certain conditions, this energy could be released as a pure, focused, electromagnetic pulse? This was a revolutionary idea. To test it, we gave the system a new, extremely complex task. We ordered it to correlate the timeline of all anomalous disappearances not with large, noticeable earthquakes, but with data on microseismic activity. We were not looking for a roar, but for the whisper of the abyss. We analyzed data from hundreds of deep-sea seismographs, searching for the tiniest tremors, the precursors of tectonic stress in the trench area. We were looking for a pattern, and we found it. The result of this analysis was perhaps the most significant breakthrough in our investigation. The system discovered a frightening, irrefutable connection. In 87% of cases, the traceless disappearance of ships and planes was preceded by a very specific sequence of events on the ocean floor. A few hours, and sometimes days, before the disaster, deep-sea sensors would record a growing series of low-frequency micro-tremors along the fault line. It was like the slow drawing of a giant bowstring. And then, a few minutes before the disappearance, there would be a sharp, short burst of high-frequency seismic activity. This was not an earthquake in the usual sense. It was the moment the accumulated stress broke through. The bowstring was released, and instead of an arrow, a monstrous invisible pulse shot up into the sky and ocean. A natural electromagnetic pulse. NEMP. This theory explained everything. It explained why the anomalous zones pulsate and move. Their activity is directly dependent on the cycles of tectonic stress. It explained the suddenness and totality of the disasters. A powerful NEMP, generated at the bottom of the ocean, is capable of instantly frying all unshielded electronics on a ship or in a plane. It doesn't just jam the radio, it melts the wiring. It doesn't just confuse compasses, it can remagnetize the metal hull of a vessel. A simulation by Logos 7 showed that the consequences of such a pulse could be even more horrifying. At a certain intensity, it can cause an effect known as eddy currents or Foucault currents in metal structures. This means the hull of a ship or plane could heat up to hundreds of degrees in a fraction of a second, causing fuel tanks to explode or even structural failure of the metal itself. This explains why we don't find wreckage. There simply is no wreckage left. An object caught in the epicenter of such a discharge could be literally vaporized. This also explains the electronic fog. A powerful pulse ionizes the air and water vapor, creating a visible glow filled with static electricity. It directly affects the human brain and nervous system, causing disorientation, hallucinations, and a loss of the sense of time. The people on board the Carol A. Deering didn't go mad. Their brains were attacked by an invisible weapon. So, we have found the source. It's not aliens or monsters from the deep. It is the planet itself. The Bermuda Triangle is a place where the Earth's geological processes give rise to a phenomenon indistinguishable from the most advanced weaponry. We have found the trigger, tectonic stress. We have found the bullet, a natural electromagnetic pulse. It seems the mystery is solved. But right here, on the verge of the solution, a new, even more disturbing question arises. We have explained the mechanics, but we have not yet looked into the eyes of the victims. We have not felt the terror that grips a person when the laws of physics cease to work and their own mind becomes their enemy. An electromagnetic pulse is a physical explanation. But what does it do to the human psyche? What are the last thoughts, the last words of those caught in this geological meat grinder? To understand this, we must analyze the most fragile and most important element of this tragedy, the human being. In the next chapter, we will focus on the last radio transmissions, on the screams from the ether. We will dissect the crew singularity. Chapter 6. The crew singularity. Up to this point, our investigation has been cold and detached. We have operated with gigabytes of data, built correlation models, analyzed geological faults and electromagnetic fields. We have spoken of ships and planes as objects, of tragedies as points on a map. We have uncovered the physical mechanism of the anomaly, a natural electromagnetic pulse born from the titanic stress of the Earth's crust. We have found the weapon, but we have not yet looked into the eyes of the victims. We have not heard the beating of their hearts in the final, fateful minutes. A machine can calculate a trajectory and probability. But can it measure terror? Can it decipher the cry of a human soul confronted with something for which our language has no words? Today, we shift from physics to psychology. From the analysis of metal to the analysis of the human consciousness on the brink of collapse. We delve into the most fragile, most intimate, and most terrifying archive, the last words of the doomed. These are not just radio communications. They are echoes from the abyss that hold the key to understanding the true nature of the phenomenon. Because the force operating in the Bermuda Triangle strikes not only at compasses and engines, its primary target is the human mind. And to prove this, we have applied the most sophisticated tool in the Logos 7 arsenal, the Psycholinguistic Analysis Protocol. A standard aircraft accident investigation report looks for specifics in a pilot's last words. Engine failure. Fire on board. Losing altitude. This is the language of understandable, albeit tragic events. But when we loaded hundreds of transcripts from the Bermuda Triangle into Logos 7, the system delivered an alarming verdict. The language of these transmissions does not fit any known model of crew behavior in an emergency. There is no panic in its pure form. There is no anger. There is no despair. There is something far worse, total cognitive dissociation, a state where the brain refuses to believe what the eyes are seeing, and the tongue cannot find the words to describe a crumbling reality. Logos 7 analyzed not only the words, but also what was hidden between them. The system conducted a spectral analysis of voice frequencies, measuring stress levels imperceptible to the human ear. It tracked the length of pauses, the speed of speech, the choice of vocabulary, building a detailed psychological map of the speaker. And this map, time and again, showed the same shocking picture. The crews were not just facing a technical problem, they were witnessing the impossible. Let's return to Flight 19, to this cornerstone of the entire mystery. We have already proven that the official version is a lie. Now let's listen to what the pilots' voices are really saying. Lieutenant Taylor reports to the ground. Both my compasses are out of order. I'm trying to find Fort Lauderdale. I'm over land, but it's broken. I'm sure I'm over the Florida Keys, but I don't know how far down. A psycholinguistic analysis of this phrase by Logos 7 reveals several anomalies. First, the tone. The stress level in Taylor's voice is lower than it should be for someone who believes they are lost. Instead of anxiety, the voice is dominated by notes of profound bewilderment. Second, the vocabulary. The phrase, broken land, is not a standard navigational or topographical term. It is an attempt to describe a visual anomaly, something he sees but cannot identify. The system compared this phrase with thousands of pilot reports. It appears only here. Taylor wasn't just lost. He was looking at a landscape familiar to him and not recognizing it. But the most terrifying moment comes later, when another pilot from his flight tries to contact him, and the controllers on the ground hear fragments of the conversation. Taylor says, "I don't know where we are. We must have gotten lost after that last turn." And then he utters a phrase that chills the blood. "Everything looks strange, even the ocean." Logos 7 flagged this phrase as a marker of maximum cognitive dissociation. What could be more constant, more familiar to a naval aviator than the sight of the ocean? It is his workplace, his world. And now, this world suddenly becomes alien. The system modeled what could have caused such a reaction. It's not an unusual watercolor. It's not strange waves. It could only be a fundamental distortion of visual perception. Perhaps a violation of perspective. Perhaps the water seemed motionless, like glass. Or conversely, it moved contrary to the laws of physics. We don't know exactly what he saw, but we know that it shattered his worldview. And at that moment, Flight 19 was doomed. Not because their instruments were failing, but because they had stopped trusting reality itself. This pattern repeats with frightening regularity. We analyzed the last messages from the cargo ship El Faro, which sank during Hurricane Joaquin in 2015. Despite it being a powerful storm, Captain Michael Davidson remained professionally calm until the very end. His speech was filled with technical terms, commands, and clear reports. Now compare this with the last known message from the vessel Marine Sulphur Queen, which disappeared in 1963 in perfectly clear weather. Perfectly. The final message was extremely brief. All is well. And then the operator added one strange, out-of-context phrase. We are sailing through a yellow haze. After that, silence. No storm, no distress signal. Just a routine report, supplemented by a strange visual image and oblivion. Logos 7 analyzed hundreds of similar fragmentary testimonies and constructed a three-stage model of the anomaly's psychological impact. Stage 1. Doubt. The crew notices minor instrument malfunctions. The compass needle floats slightly. The radio begins to crackle. The tone of messages remains calm, almost mundane. It is perceived as a routine technical issue that any professional can handle. At this stage, they still believe they are in control of the situation. Stage 2. Dissociation. The turning point arrives. The anomaly shifts from affecting technology to affecting the senses. The crew begins to see or hear things that contradict their experience and instrument readings. This could be the electronic fog, a strange glow on the water, an inexplicable hum. The language in radio communications changes dramatically. Technical terms disappear. In their place come confused, emotional descriptions. Everything looks strange. I've never seen anything like this. What the hell is that? Spectral voice analysis shows a sharp spike in stress markers, but it is the stress not of panic, but of deep shock and disorientation. At this stage, the crew loses its footing. They no longer understand where they are or what is happening. Stage 3. Silence. This is the shortest and most terrifying stage. After a period of disorientation, a sudden, absolute silence ensues. No scream, no SOS signal, no final words. Just a break in communication. Logos 7 suggests 2 possible explanations for this, both horrific. The first, psychological collapse. The event becomes so transcendental that the human psyche simply shuts down, falling into a stupor. A person sees something so monstrous that they lose the power of speech seconds before physical death. The second explanation, speed. The physical destruction of the object occurs so rapidly that the crew does not have even a fraction of a second to realize the end and press the transmit button. Silence becomes the final message. We have understood that the anomaly is not just a physical phenomenon. It is a cognitive weapon. It does not break the ship. It breaks the captain's will. It does not stall the engine. It stalls the pilot's mind. It strips a person of their most essential faculty, their ability to understand the world around them. And then, when they are completely disoriented and helpless, it delivers the final, fatal blow. This brings us to a new, even deeper question. We have recorded evidence of the yellow fog, of a strange glow, of the distortion of space and time in Bruce Jernan's account. We always considered these to be mere side effects of the electromagnetic pulse. But what if they are not? What if these strange phenomena are not the consequence but the cause? What if, at the very heart of the Bermuda Triangle, something is hidden that can manipulate not only the magnetic field, but the very fabric of space-time? To answer this question, we must analyze the rarest, most insane, and most incredible testimonies. We must study the time signature. Chapter 7. The time signature. Up to this point, we have operated within the framework of, albeit expanded, understandable laws of physics. Tectonic stress, the piezoelectric effect, a powerful electromagnetic pulse. All this sounds complex, yet logical. It is an explanation that could satisfy a scientist. It explains the failed instruments, the fried radios, and even, with some stretch, the traceless disappearances. We have built a coherent, convincing model. And now, we are going to destroy it. Because this model, for all its elegance, fails to explain the strangest, most disturbing, and most important facts. It explains the shadow on the wall, but it does not describe the monster casting it. In our data set, there has always been a small but incredibly noisy cluster of incidents. We set them aside, labeling them as statistical outliers, or unreliable testimonies. These were eyewitness accounts that sounded like science fiction. Stories of strange fogs that appeared on a clear day, of time that either compressed or stretched, of a sky that behaved contrary to all laws of optics. Skeptics dismissed them, calling them hallucinations, the effects of stress, or simple fabrications. But Logos 7 knows no skepticism. For it, there is no unreliable data. There's only information that either fits the existing model or requires the creation of a new, more complex, and shocking one. We instructed the system to stop ignoring this noise and to analyze it as the primary signal. And what it discovered changes our understanding of the Bermuda Triangle forever. It is not just a geological anomaly. It is a place where the very fabric of reality sometimes fails. Let's start with the most documented and incredible case, December 4th, 1970. Experienced pilot Bruce Gernon, along with his father and a business partner, takes off in a single-engine Bonanza aircraft from Andros Island in the Bahamas, heading for Palm Beach, Florida. The flight was supposed to take about 75 minutes. The weather was good, except for one strange storm cloud directly on their course. Gernon decided to fly around it, but suddenly the cloud began to grow at an unnatural speed, turning into a gigantic, dark mass. While trying to gain altitude, he saw an opening in the cloud, resembling a perfectly straight tunnel. Having no other choice, he directed the plane inside. What he described next is unlike any meteorological phenomenon. It was not turbulence. A strange silence reigned inside the tunnel. Its walls did not look like clouds. They glowed from within, and, as Gernon claimed, thin white lines spiraled along them counterclockwise. He called it electronic fog. All his navigational instruments, including the magnetic and gyro compass, went haywire. He felt a strange sensation of weightlessness, as if the plane was not flying but suspended in place. After flying through this tunnel, which he estimated took only a few tens of seconds, he broke out into a completely clear sky. But something was wrong. The sky had a strange grayish-yellow tint, and below, there was no sun, no ocean, only a whitish haze. And then the time shift occurred. Gernon contacted the controller in Miami. The controller was in shock. He reported that there was not a single aircraft on his radar in the Bermuda Islands area. A few seconds later, he added that he could see Gernon's plane, but not where it should have been, but already over the coast of Miami. Gernon looked at his watch. Only 47 minutes had passed since takeoff. 47 minutes instead of 75. He had covered a distance of 250 miles at an average speed that was almost twice the maximum speed of his aircraft. He didn't just fly fast. He had somehow cut nearly 30 minutes of time and 100 miles of space from his journey. We loaded absolutely everything related to this flight into Logos 7, the exact model of the plane, its load, meteorological maps, radar data, and Gernon's full report. We ordered the system to find a rational explanation. Could it have been a tailwind of unimaginable force? The simulation showed that such acceleration would require a sustained wind of over 400 miles per hour blowing in a narrow corridor. No such wind was recorded either before or after. It would have been a hurricane surpassing anything humanity has ever seen, yet completely invisible to everyone else. The verdict from Logos 7 was incontrovertible. Bruce Gernon's story, from the perspective of classical physics and aerodynamics, is impossible. However, the radar data from Miami confirms its temporal anomaly. The system classified this incident as a confirmed case of a localized spatio-temporal distortion. Now, imagine. Bruce Gernon is one of the lucky ones. He flew out the other side of the tunnel. But what happens to those who do not fly out? We returned to our database and started looking for correlations. We searched for mentions of yellow fog, strange glow, dead silence in the last messages of the missing crews. And the system found them. The last words of the radio operator from the Marine Sulphur Queen. The accounts of other pilots about glowing clouds. The strange description of broken land and an ocean that was not right from Lieutenant Taylor. All of this was not just the aftermath of an electromagnetic strike. These were descriptions of entering the same anomaly as Bruce Gernon. This is its visual signature. Our previous conclusion about a natural electromagnetic pulse was correct, but incomplete. It was only the first stage. Logos 7 constructed a new, far more radical model. In 99% of cases, the tectonic stress in the Puerto Rico Trench is released as a simple NEMP. It disables technology, causes interference. This is what we already understood. But in 1% of cases, when dozens of unique factors coincide, the level of stress, the composition of the rock, the configuration of the Earth's magnetic field, something else happens. The released energy is so colossal and focused that it doesn't just create an electromagnetic pulse. It momentarily punctures the very fabric of space-time. It creates what could be called a local, unstable wormhole or time tunnel. The electronic fog is not just ionized gas. It is the visual manifestation of the boundary between our reality and this anomalous zone. Inside it, physical constants can change. Time can flow faster, slower, or even backward. Space can contract or expand. This explains everything. It explains the instant disappearances without wreckage. The ship or plane is not destroyed in our world. It is entirely transported to another point in space or time from which there is no return. There is no wreckage because the disaster itself occurs outside our physical universe. It explains the time shifts as in Jernan's case. He was lucky to pass through the tunnel and return to our reality, but with a deficit of time. It explains the psychological terror we recorded in the pilots' voices. Their brains were confronted not just with an instrument failure. They were confronted with a fundamental violation of the laws of being. They saw what could not be, because for a brief moment, they were where these laws do not exist. So, we stand on the threshold of the most shocking truth. The Bermuda Triangle is not just a place where ships sink. It is a scar on the body of the planet that sometimes bleeds not magma, but time itself. It is a natural, chaotically operating mechanism capable of creating short-lived portals into the unknown. This is the most dangerous place on Earth, not because storms rage there, but because reality itself sometimes ceases to exist there. It seems we have found the final answer, a natural phenomenon of incredible power, but still natural, accidental and blind. But then the last, most disturbing question arises. If this is merely a blind force of nature, why have the authorities, the Navy, the Coast Guard, government agencies, so persistently denied the very existence of the anomaly for decades? Why did they fabricate reports, blaming the deceased pilots? Why did they create and maintain protocol coincidence? What are they afraid of? What are they hiding? Perhaps they know far more about the nature of this phenomenon than we think. Perhaps they know that it is not so natural after all. To answer these questions, we must shift the focus of our investigation from the victims to those who covered up the tracks. In the next chapter, we will dissect protocol, cover-up. Chapter 8, Protocol, Cover-up. What could be more dangerous than an unknown threat? Only a threat that is known, studied, and deliberately hidden from you by those who swore to protect you. For 7 chapters, we have, like surgeons, dissected the Bermuda Triangle anomaly. We separated fact from fiction, found the physical source in the geological stress of the abyss, and even peeked over the edge of the known universe, postulating that this energy could tear the very fabric of space-time. Our picture was majestic and terrifying, but it was a picture of a blind, natural force, and therein lay our greatest mistake. We assumed we were the first to follow this trail. We are not. This trail has been followed for over 70 years, and those who are ahead are desperately trying to cover their tracks and convince us that no trail exists at all. Today, we shift the lens of our investigation from the phenomenon to the people, to the organizations, to the protocols and orders that are not visible to the public. We ask a simple but subversive question. If the Bermuda Triangle is just a natural phenomenon, why is its existence so fiercely denied at the official level? No one hides the existence of Death Valley or the Pacific Ring of Fire. Hurricanes are given names and earthquake zones are mapped. These dangers are acknowledged and studied. But the Triangle anomaly is surrounded by a wall of silence, ridicule, and outright disinformation. Why? Because protocol Coincidence, which we debunked in the first chapter, is just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath it lies a much darker and deeper protocol. Protocol cover-up. Let's start with the most cynical and cruel element of this cover-up, the posthumous slander of heroes. Let's go back to Flight 19. We have already proven that the official version blaming the flight leader, Lieutenant Charles Taylor, for the error does not stand up to scrutiny. But we haven't told you the whole story. Logo 7 analyzed not only the radio communications, but also the evolution of the investigation report itself. And what the system discovered is an act of blatant falsification. The initial U.S. Navy investigation report, compiled by a board of 5 senior officers, was 500 pages long. It was thorough and honest. Its conclusion stated, "Cause of disappearance unknown." The board found no evidence of fault on the part of Lieutenant Taylor or any other crew member. It was an honest answer from professionals. But this answer did not satisfy the high command. A few months later, that report was overruled, and a new, abbreviated verdict was issued in its place. In it, all blame was placed on Taylor. He was accused of mental aberration and disorientation. Taylor's family fought for his good name for years and eventually succeeded in having the finding amended, but the initial damage was done. A convenient scapegoat was found, and the case was closed. Why was this done? Logo 7 modeled the motivation of the Navy command. To admit that 5 military aircraft and another rescue plane could simply disappear in peacetime without any apparent reason in a strategically vital region for the U.S. was tantamount to admitting their own powerlessness. It meant acknowledging the presence of a force in their territorial waters that they did not control or understand. It was a blow to national security. It was easier to blame it all on the mistake of one man. This was not a search for truth. It was an act of information control. And this act was repeated dozens of times. Every unexplained disappearance was attributed to weather, equipment failure, or human error, even when all the evidence screamed otherwise. But the cover-up was not limited to paper reports. It also has a very physical, geographical dimension. We tasked Logo 7 with a new mission: to correlate our map of pulsating electromagnetic and seismic anomalies with a map of U.S. naval activity in the region over the past 70 years. Specifically, we focused on one of the most secret U.S. Navy facilities, the Atlantic Undersea Test and Evaluation Center, or AUTEC. It is located on Andros Island, Bahamas, right in the heart of one of the most active anomalous zones we identified. Officially, AUTEC is a range for testing submarines, sonars, and torpedoes. It's known as the Underwater Area 51. Logo 7 analyzed thousands of notices to airmen and mariners, so-called NOTAMs, that the Navy has issued over the decades, declaring certain squares of the ocean temporarily closed to civilian shipping and flights due to military exercises. The system then overlaid the dates and coordinates of these closed zones onto the timeline of the seismic activity spikes we recorded, which, as we established, are precursors to anomalous events. What the system discovered was irrefutable proof of a cover-up. The correlation was 89%. In nearly 9 out of 10 cases, a few hours before the peak of seismic activity and the presumed electromagnetic discharge, the U.S. Navy would preemptively close that exact area. Think about what this means. They were not just reacting to events, they were predicting them. They have technology or a methodology that allows them to track the buildup of tectonic stress and foresee the moment of the shot. They know when and where the anomaly will strike next, and instead of warning the world and declaring this zone permanently dangerous, they silently clear it of potential victims and witnesses under the pretext of routine exercises. This changes the entire picture. The authorities are not just denying the phenomenon, they are actively studying, monitoring, and using it for their own purposes. The Bermuda Triangle zone is not just a dangerous place, it is a giant natural laboratory. the most valuable strategic asset on the planet. And now, the logic of the cover-up becomes clear. The first reason is economics and logistics. Acknowledging that one of the busiest sea and air corridors in the world is a zone of unpredictable mortal danger would cause a global economic collapse. Insurance costs would skyrocket. Shipping and airline companies would be forced to reroute, losing billions of dollars. This is chaos no government would permit. The second reason is panic. Imagine the headlines. Government confirms a zone exists in the Atlantic where you can be erased from reality. The consequences for public psychology would be devastating. But the third reason is the most important. National security. A force capable of making objects invisible to radar, instantly frying electronics, and possibly even manipulating space-time is the ultimate weapon. Whoever first understands how to replicate or at least predict this effect will gain a military advantage that would make nuclear weapons look like a child's toy. The Bermuda Triangle is not just a threat, it is the promise of unprecedented power. And for this promise, superpowers are willing to lie, falsify reports, and sacrifice the reputations of the dead. They hide the truth not because they fear it. They hide it because they want to own it exclusively. And here, the most disturbing question arises. If they have been studying this phenomenon for so long and so closely, are they limiting themselves to passive observation? Autech is a test center. They don't just watch, they act. They detonate charges underwater, use powerful sonars, conduct experiments with electromagnetic fields. Logos 7 has put forward one last, most terrifying hypothesis. What if some of the most powerful and tragic events in the Triangle were not entirely natural? What if military experiments conducted in this unstable zone sometimes accidentally or intentionally triggered the release of energy? What if they haven't just learned to predict the storm, but are sometimes causing the lightning strike themselves? This would mean that some disappearances were not just tragedies, but involuntary manslaughters. We are on the final step. We have assembled all the pieces of the puzzle. We have the physical mechanism of the anomaly. We have its effect on technology and the human psyche. We have proof that the authorities know the truth and are hiding it for their own interests. Now, only one last step remains: to connect all of this into a single continuous picture. To see the event through the eyes of the victims, knowing what is happening on the ocean floor and in secret government offices. In the next chapter, we will do what no one has ever done before. Logos 7 will synthesize all this data, geological, electromagnetic, psychological, and conspiratorial. Based on it, it will create a complete minute-by-minute reconstruction of a typical disappearance event in the Bermuda Triangle. We will be on board a doomed ship and will follow this path to the very end. We will witness the synthesis. Chapter 9. The Synthesis. We have come a long way. We have descended into the geological hell of the Puerto Rico Trench and soared into the silent skies above it. We have analyzed the rust on the decks of ghost ships and deciphered the last broken words of doomed pilots. We have exposed the protocol of lies and proven that behind the wall of official denial lies the cold, calculated interest of the military. We have collected the evidence. We have interrogated the witnesses, even if their voices reach us from beyond the brink of non-existence. We have built a theory that explains the physics, the psychology, and the politics of this phenomenon. Now, it is time for the most important part. It is time to assemble all these fragments into a single, terrifying mosaic. Today, we will not analyze. We will synthesize. Logos 7 has processed the entire array of collected data and, based on it, has created a simulation. This is not a guess. It is not a fantasy. It is the most probable, minute-by-minute reconstruction of a typical disappearance event in the Bermuda Triangle. We invite you aboard the fictional cargo ship Odyssey. Its name, its route, its crew, they are a composite image from hundreds of real tragedies. What you are about to hear is the concentrated truth, purified of rumors and exaggerations. This is what really happens in the darkness between Florida and Puerto Rico. Time to event, T-minus 24 hours. It begins not on the ship's bridge, but at a depth of 8,000 meters. In complete darkness and under monstrous pressure, the North American tectonic plate makes another micro movement, shifting by a few millimeters. On the surface, this is completely unnoticeable. But deep underwater, in the thickness of the Earth's crust, the stress builds. Quartz rocks, compressed with a force equal to hundreds of thousands of atmospheres, begin to accumulate an electrical charge. A network of ultra-sensitive deep-sea sensors, secretly installed by the US Navy around the AU Tech base in the Bahamas, detects this growing seismic tremor. At a secret facility, a yellow indicator lights up in the silence of the command center. Computer models analyze the data and issue a forecast. Within the next 48 hours, there is a 93% probability of a powerful piezoelectric discharge in quadrant Victor 7. A standard NOTAM is immediately issued. The area is declared a zone of naval exercises and is closed to civilian shipping and flights. Protocol cover-up is working flawlessly. At the same time, 300 miles to the north, the cargo ship Odyssey is on its course. On board are 27 crew members and 15,000 tons of general cargo. Its captain, 52-year-old Arkady Volkov, a veteran with 30 years of sea experience, checks the route. He sees the notification about the closed zone, but his course passes 40 miles from its border. He is calm. The weather is perfect. The ocean is smooth as glass. Time to event, T-minus 1 hour. The stress on the ocean floor reaches a critical point. The Navy's sensors show peak values. The readiness level at the AU Tech base is raised to red. All research vessels and submarines have been moved out of the danger zone. They have transformed from researchers into observers, ready to record another natural experiment. On the bridge of the Odyssey, a routine calm prevails. The second officer drinks his coffee and looks at the radar. The screen is clear. The radio is silent. The horizon is clear. It seems that nothing in the world can disturb this idyll. But the invisible trigger is already cocked. The ship, unknowingly, has entered the kill zone. Time to event, T-minus 10 minutes. Stage 1, doubt, the first sign. The sailor on watch notices the gyro compass needle tremble for a moment and shift by half a degree before returning to its position. He attributes it to a slight vibration. In the radio room, the operator hears a brief burst of static that immediately disappears. In the galley, the lights flicker for a fraction of a second. These are the first faint precursors of the coming storm. The energy stored in the Earth's crust begins to leak, creating minor electromagnetic fluctuations. The crew pays no attention. They still believe the laws of physics are immutable. Time to event, T-minus 1 minute. Stage 2, dissociation. At the bottom of the trench, the final micro-tremor occurs. The bonds between the crystalline lattices of the rocks break. The energy accumulated over decades is released in 1/trillionth of a second. A focused beam of energy, invisible and silent, rushes upward at the speed of light. Captain Volkov, standing on the bridge wing, is the first to feel something is wrong. The air suddenly becomes thick, electrified. The hair on his arms stands on end. He smells a strange odor of ozone. And in that same instant, the natural electromagnetic pulse engulfs the Odyssey. A cascade failure occurs. On the bridge, all screens go dark simultaneously. Radar, navigation system, sonar, all dead. The lights throughout the ship go out, then the dim red emergency lighting flickers on. The electronically controlled engines stall, and the giant ship begins to lose headway, plunging into a ringing silence, broken only by shouts and the sound of alarms. The magnetic compass needle begins to spin wildly. The radio emits only a deafening white noise. The Odyssey is blinded, deafened, and has lost its spatial orientation in 3 seconds. Time of event, 0. The event horizon. It is at this moment that something happens which separates the Bermuda Triangle from any other dangerous point on the planet. The energy discharge was so powerful that it didn't just fry the electronics. It created a temporary rupture in spacetime. The electronic fog begins to condense around the ship. This is not a fog of water vapor. It is a glowing, yellowish-green haze, the visual manifestation of the anomalous zone's boundary. Captain Volkov looks overboard and sees what Lieutenant Taylor saw, an ocean that is not right. The waves are frozen, as if in a photograph. The sky has lost its blue color, turning a pale gray. Space distorts. The distant horizon seems unnaturally close. The crew experiences acute disorientation and nausea. Their brains cannot process sensory information that contradicts all their life experience. Reality is falling apart. Time after event, T plus 30 seconds. The singularity. Here, the Logos 7 simulation splits into 2 most probable scenarios, depending on the intensity of the discharge. Scenario A, total annihilation. The ship was at the very epicenter of the rupture. The energy permeating it induces eddy currents in the metal hull, heating it to thousands of degrees in fractions of a second. There is no explosion in the conventional sense, no fire and smoke. There's only a silent, blinding flash of white light. The massive ship and the 27 people on board disintegrate into subatomic particles. The space-time anomaly collapses. When it's all over a few seconds later, nothing remains on the ocean surface. No oil slick, no wreckage, not a single life jacket. Only the calm water, holding its secret. Scenario B, psychological collapse. The pulse was weaker. On the periphery of the zone, the ship remains intact. The engines are dead, the electronics fried, but the hull is undamaged. The emergency lighting returns, but the crew is already broken. What they saw during those 30 seconds has permanently shattered their minds. They are seized not by panic, but by a transcendental metaphysical terror. They no longer trust the ship, the ocean, or their own eyes. In their minds, the only salvation is to leave this cursed place. They lower the lifeboats, grabbing useless navigation instruments, and cast off from their completely undamaged home into the open ocean, towards certain death. Time after event. T plus 1 hour. The cleanup. The anomaly has vanished as suddenly as it appeared. A U.S. Navy vessel, which had been waiting at a safe distance all this time, appears over the horizon. Its mission is not rescue, but data collection and evidence concealment. In Scenario A, they find nothing and report as such. In Scenario B, they find the drifting Odyssey, another ghost ship. A special team boards, confiscates all logbooks and recording devices. A few days later, the official report will state that the Odyssey likely sank due to a sudden and severe storm, and the crew is missing, presumed lost. Protocol cover-up completes its work. The circle is closed. This is the synthesis. This is the ruthless mechanics of the tragedy. And now you know everything. You know how it works. But one last question remains. The most important one. If all this is the result of a complex interplay of natural and military factors, what is the final answer? What is the Bermuda Triangle at its core? A blind natural force? A secret military testing ground? Or something else? Something that combines all of this and elevates it to a completely new level of understanding. In the final chapter, we will give that answer. We will put everything together and call things by their proper names. We will explain why the truth was hidden for so long and what it means for all of humanity. We will give you the answer. Final chapter. The answer. We have reached the end. For 9 chapters, we have followed a trail of shadows, gathering scattered facts piece by piece. We have dived into the abyss and soared into the heavens. We have listened to the voices of the dead and read between the lines of reports from the living who lied. We used the cold logic of Logos 7 to build a model that explains everything. The failed instruments, the ghost ships, the traceless disappearances, the spatio-temporal distortions, and finally, the sinister protocol of concealment. And now that all the elements are in place, it is time to give the final, definitive answer. What is the Bermuda Triangle? The answer turned out to be both simpler and more terrifying than we could have ever imagined. The Bermuda Triangle is not a habitat for sea monsters or a portal for alien spacecraft, but neither is it just an area of bad weather and human error, as they tried to convince us. The truth, as is often the case, does not lie in the middle. It lies in a completely different dimension. The Bermuda Triangle is a weapon of planetary scale that the Earth itself has, unknowingly, aimed at us. And humanity, in the form of its most powerful and secretive structures, is desperately trying to seize its trigger. Let's break this formula down into its components. Part 1. A weapon of planetary scale. We are used to thinking of weapons as something created. A sword, a gun, an atomic bomb. But nature creates weapons far more perfect and destructive. A black hole is a gravitational weapon. A solar flare is an electromagnetic one. A pandemic virus is a biological one. The Bermuda Triangle phenomenon, as the analysis of Logos 7 has proven, fits perfectly into this paradigm. It is a geological weapon. The unique combination of tectonic stress in the Puerto Rico Trench and the piezoelectric properties of the rock has created a natural mechanism capable of generating and focusing energy of such power that it can instantly destroy our most advanced creations and even tear the very fabric of reality. It is not an intelligent force. It has no purpose or malevolent will. It is as blind and chaotic as an earthquake or a volcanic eruption. It simply exists, subject to cycles of geological stress that last for millennia. It was active long before Columbus, and will be active long after our civilization is nothing but a thin layer in the geological record. We simply built our sea and air routes over the muzzle of this loaded planetary rifle. And sometimes, it fires. Part 2. That the Earth itself has, unknowingly, aimed at us. This is the key point. Why here? Why not in the Mariana Trench, or any other deep-sea trench? Logos 7 conducted a comparative analysis of all deep-sea faults on the planet. The Puerto Rico Trench is unique in its combination of 3 factors: depth, the speed of plate subduction, and, most importantly, the mineral composition of the crust. It is here that a rare concentration of quartz and other piezoelectric minerals is found, which act as a giant converter of mechanical pressure into electromagnetic energy. It is a geological accident, a fatal coincidence that has turned this specific region into a death trap. Part 3, and the most important, and humanity is desperately trying to seize its trigger. This is where a natural phenomenon turns into a geopolitical thriller. Protocol, cover-up, is not just an attempt to avoid panic and economic losses. As our analysis has shown, it is an active, targeted operation to study and ultimately weaponize this natural force. Think about the consequences. Imagine you could artificially trigger such an energy release at any point in the world where there is tectonic stress. You would gain the ability to instantly and tracelessly destroy an enemy aircraft carrier or an entire submarine fleet, leaving not the slightest proof of an attack. You could paralyze the electronics of an entire city or country, throwing them back into the Stone Age, and blame it all on an unusual natural phenomenon. This is absolute supremacy. This is a power that neither Caesar nor Napoleon could have dreamed of. And for the sake of possessing such power, any means are justified. Lies, falsifications, concealing the truth about the deaths of hundreds, if not thousands of people. All this becomes an acceptable price. The AUTech naval base in the Bahamas is not just an observation post. It is a laboratory where experiments on the artificial stimulation of the piezoelectric effect are being conducted. They use directed acoustic waves, deep-sea explosions, powerful electromagnetic generators, trying to find the frequency, the key, that will allow them to pull the trigger at will. And, as we have suggested, it is possible that some of the most tragic incidents were the result of failed or uncontrolled experiments. Perhaps Flight 19 was the unwitting victim not of blind nature, but of the first clumsy test of this new type of weapon. This would explain the Navy's desperate desire to fabricate the report and find a scapegoat. They were not hiding a natural mystery, but their own monstrous mistake. So, there it is, the final answer. The mystery of the Bermuda Triangle is a story of two forces. The first is the blind, incomprehensible power of our own planet, which in one specific point has created the perfect conditions to generate energy capable of breaking the laws of physics. The second is the eternal, insatiable thirst for power of humanity itself, which drives it to try to tame this power, regardless of the cost or consequences. We live on the surface of a giant, chaotically operating weapon, while in secret laboratories, the best minds on the planet are trying to find its code. And this brings us to the final, most alarming conclusion. The truth is being hidden, not to protect us from fear. It is being hidden so that one day it can be used against us. While we argue about aliens and lost civilizations, the real game is being played deep underwater in a world of colossal pressure and absolute secrecy. And the day they find that code will be the day the rules of war and the very existence of humanity change forever. Our investigation is complete. We have given you all the data that Logos 7 was able to extract. We have given you the answer. What you do with this truth is up to you. But the next time you look at a world map, at that serene blue triangle in the Atlantic, you will know that it is not just a geographical name. It is a scar, and it is still bleeding,